happen myself.
But Christine kind of alluded to like there were seeds being planted. Like it felt like, that she was kind of pushing for something.
No, I don't even remember talking about this. I think there was a knowledge about it.
Robyn looks straight ahead on the tell-all couch and says she does not believe Meri has any reason to distrust her. The room goes quiet. The words hang there. And in that small pause, something cracks open. But what happens next shifts the entire meaning of the catfishing story. Was this ever only about an online mistake? Or was it about who controlled the flow of truth? You can see it in Robyn's face while she explains herself. Her voice stays steady. Her shoulders stay firm. She speaks like someone who already decided how this story should be heard. She talks about knowing what was going on, about being involved, about trying to help, about encouraging Cody to step in. There is no hesitation, no soft language, no nervous backtracking. She sounds certain, and certainty carries weight in a family like this. Meri, on the other couch, does not look angry. She looks tired. Her eyes drop when trust comes up. Her mouth tightens before she speaks. You can feel how heavy that word still is for her. Trust. After everything she lived through during that time, the messages, the shame, the way the story followed her into every family conversation for years. But here's the part most people rush past. Robyn does not describe standing back. She describes being in the middle of the situation, knowing details, talking through it, guiding Cody toward action, framing it as concern, framing it as protection. Stay with this moment, because this is where the story quietly changes. When Robyn explains her role, she does not talk about boundaries. She talks about access. And that difference matters more than the scandal itself. This is the point where the show stops feeling like a messy family problem and starts feeling like something organized. If you watch closely, the language is not emotional. It is operational. She knew. She passed things along. She pushed for intervention. That pattern is not loud. It is subtle, but it sits right there on the screen. Listen again to how quickly Cody is mentioned when Robyn explains her choices. Listen to how often helping means telling. Listen to how support means involvement. This is not an accusation. Not yet. This is a reframing. The shock is not that Robyn cared. The shock is how the caring works. Right here is where the catfishing story stops being about betrayal and starts becoming about management. Because when one person becomes the safe path to the husband, control shifts quietly. And once information starts moving through one channel, every relationship in the room changes shape. This is where the real question begins. This family does not move on trust. It moves on reporting. And once you see that, the scandal no longer looks like the center of the damage. It looks like the entry point. Because what follows is not about who made a mistake. It is about who learned how to control the fallout before the messages, before the headlines. Before the word catfish became a permanent shadow over her name, Meri was already standing alone inside the family. The legal divorce from Cody did not just change paperwork. It quietly removed her position. On screen, you can see the shift. The way decisions stop including her. The way conversations happen without her in the room. The way her place in the family starts to feel symbolic instead of real. By the time the online relationship enters the story, Meri is emotionally cut off from the one relationship that once defined her role. Cody barely hides his distance. Group scenes feel careful around her. Everyone speaks softly, but no one really leans in. When the truth finally comes out, the humiliation is public, not just for viewers, for the family. Confession scenes are framed as accountability, but watch what follows instead of what is said. The tone changes. The posture changes. Meri becomes something to manage, Almost immediately, the family response shifts away from comfort and toward control. Who knows what? Who is telling Cody? Who is allowed to talk to Meri? You see it in the way group conversations tighten. You see it in how carefully people describe her behavior. You hear it in how often her name comes up when she is not present. They talk about Meri more than they talk to her. That pattern is visible before the scandal, but it accelerates after it. During group sit-downs, Meri tries to explain how isolated she felt. She talks about loneliness without softening it. She admits wanting connection. She does not hide how broken she felt. But her words rarely become the focus of the conversation. The focus becomes the risk, what she might do, how the family looks, what Cody needs to hear. Even when someone expresses concern, it is filtered through how the situation affects him. After the scandal, Meri is not treated like someone who made a painful mistake. She is treated like a liability. Her access shrinks. Her voice carries less weight. Her presence becomes conditional. You can watch her try to stay emotionally present anyway. She keeps showing up to family events. She sits through awkward group talks. She reaches for humor. She tries to participate in celebrations where the emotional distance is visible on her face. And every time she does, the gap feels wider because the trust is no longer something that can be repaired privately. It becomes something evaluated publicly, repeatedly. The real damage is not only the embarrassment of what happened online, it is what happens after. The story hardens. The language around her hardens. The way the family describes her hardens. At a certain point, the scandal stops being a chapter in Meri's life and becomes the headline that defines her inside the family. Not a mistake, an identity. And once a person becomes an identity instead of a person, recovery stops being possible. When Robyn first enters the family, she is clearly positioned as the new wife. Careful, grateful, emotionally open. On screen, she listens more than she speaks. She frames herself as someone trying to learn how the family works. But over time, something changes. Not in status, in function. Across multiple seasons, you can see how Robyn begins to speak differently when problems surface. Her concern is always presented gently. She rarely opens with frustration. She opens with worry, with confusion, with emotional language that softens the message before it ever reaches Cody. She does not bring conflict to him as conflict. She brings it as concern. That framing matters. When other wives talk to Cody, their conversations often become defensive quickly. Explanations turn into arguments. Emotions escalate. You see Cody shut down or push back. With Robyn, the emotional tone is different. She slows the moment down. She explains how someone feels before that person gets the chance to explain it themselves. Again and again, Robyn becomes the emotional interpreter between Cody and the rest of the family. You hear it in the way she says things like, she is just trying to help him understand, or she wants to make sure he sees the full picture. Her language centers clarity, protection, emotional safety. But watch the structure of those conversations. The story often reaches Cody through Robyn first. The frustration, the confusion, the hurt. It arrives filtered. This is the quiet shift. Robyn does not become important because she avoids hard topics. She becomes important because she controls how the hard topics are delivered. Midway through the series, this pattern becomes unmistakable. When tension builds between Cody and another wife, Robyn is often already aware. She already knows how upset someone is. She already understands what the problem is supposed to be. And when Cody talks about those problems, the emotional language he uses frequently mirrors Robyn's. Not the words of the wife who is actually hurting, the words of the person who explained the hurt to him. Information starts to move through her. Emotions start to move through her. Even intentions start to move through her. This does not make Robyn cruel. It makes her strategically positioned. She becomes the safest emotional space for Cody, not because she agrees with him all the time, but because she reduces emotional risk for him. Conflict reaches him already organized, already softened, already framed. By the later seasons, Robyn is no longer simply another wife with opinions. She is an emotional gate. What gets through, how it gets through, and when it gets through. That role is not assigned. It is earned. And it is rewarded. In a family where access to Cody means security, influence, and stability, Robyn adapts perfectly to the system in front of her. Not by dominating it by this point, it becomes clear that Robyn is not the only person moving information toward Cody. The system is bigger than one wife. In a tell-all moment, Janelle openly admits that she sometimes passes things along to him. She does not frame it as betrayal. She frames it as responsibility, as trying to keep him informed, as helping him handle situations before they grow. There is no shame in how she says it, and that is what matters. Because inside this family, reporting is normal. It is not treated as gossip. It is treated as support. Over and over, you hear the same emotional logic repeated across seasons. The wives talk about wanting to protect Cody from stress, from confusion, from being blindsided, from emotional chaos. The intention sounds caring, but the structure it creates is something else. Private conversations between wives rarely stay private. Concerns shared quietly in one kitchen scene often reappear later in a group conversation, filtered and reshaped. What starts as vulnerability turns into summary. What starts as emotion turns into information. And the person most affected by that information often finds out last. The real tension is not that Cody is being told things. The real tension is how the story changes on its way to him. When one wife speaks to another, the words still belong to the person who said them. But once those words are carried upward, they stop being personal. They become evidence. They become context. They become justification for decisions that happen somewhere else. This is where the quiet fear lives. Not fear of confrontation. Fear of misinterpretation. Fear that your worst emotional moment will be reduced to a sentence. Fear that someone else will choose which part of your pain reaches Cody. Across multiple seasons, you can see how careful the wives become with what they share with each other. They hesitate. They soften their language. They stop mid-sentence. They reframe their own feelings before anyone else can do it for them. Because once the story leaves their mouth, it is no longer under their control. Janelle's admission does not expose cruelty. It exposes culture. A culture where being helpful means being a messenger. A culture where emotional loyalty is measured by how well you keep the leader informed. A culture where closeness to Cody is built through usefulness, not confidentiality. By the time conflicts reach him, they are rarely raw. They are organized. They are simplified. They are already emotionally interpreted. And inside that structure, trust between the wives slowly erodes. Not because they want to betray one another, but because they learn that privacy is fragile. The deeper truth this session leaves behind is simple and uncomfortable. In this family, loyalty is not proven by keeping someone's confidence. It is proven by how effectively you serve the flow of information, not by trust. By the time the emotional reporting system is visible, the money structure underneath it is already doing quiet damage. On screen, the family repeatedly explains that finances are shared, centralized, managed for the good of everyone. But what actually plays out is far more fragile. Income moves into one pool. Decisions move out through one voice. Again and again, housing becomes the visible pressure point. Who gets to move? Who has to wait? Who is allowed stability now and who is promised stability later? Timing becomes everything. And timing is never neutral. Coyote Pass turns into the clearest example of how emotional loyalty and financial access collide. The land is framed as a shared dream, a future for all of them. But season after season, it becomes a stalled project that keeps everyone emotionally suspended. No clear plan, no timeline that holds, no equal movement forward. For Janelle, this is not symbolic. It is practical. Across multiple seasons, she openly expresses frustration with how money is handled. She talks about confusion, about shifting priorities, about not understanding where things stand. Her concern is not about luxury. It is about control, about knowing what her future actually looks like. And the more uncertain the finances become, the more emotionally careful she becomes as well. That is the quiet trade. Christine reaches a breaking point that is not only emotional, it is structural. When she decides to leave, she does not negotiate for land. She does not wait for plans to materialize. She creates her own financial exit. And the moment she does, something important shifts. For the first time, one wife is no longer financially trapped inside the shared system. Janelle watches this closely. You can see the hesitation in her language. She talks about independence, about wanting something of her own, but she also talks about the risk, about losing access, about not knowing how separation would even work inside such a tangled structure. Meri, meanwhile, stays frozen. She has business success outside the family, but emotionally, she remains tied to a system that no longer invests in her future. Her financial movement exists beside the family, not inside it. And that creates paralysis. The emotional hook in all of this is not greed. It is dependence. When housing, savings, and future security are centralized, disagreement becomes expensive. Questioning decisions becomes risky. Emotional obedience becomes practical, not because anyone demands it directly, because survival quietly rewards alignment. Coyote Pass is not just land. It is leverage. It keeps everyone waiting. It keeps everyone hopeful. It keeps everyone emotionally invested in a future that never quite arrives. And once Christine steps outside that loop, the structure is exposed. Independence is suddenly visible, not as rebellion, as possibility. And in a system built on shared dependence, one person finding a way out does not just change her life. Long before the catfishing scandal defines Meri's reputation, she is already emotionally separated inside the family. Not loudly, quietly. What makes Meri different on screen is not how often she complains. It is how directly she names what hurts. Across multiple seasons, Meri talks openly about jealousy, about feeling left out, about feeling unwanted, about struggling to watch Cody build emotional closeness with other wives while her own connection disappears. She does not soften those admissions. She sits in the discomfort and says it anyway. Other wives often speak around pain. They talk about stress, about being overwhelmed, about practical problems. Meri speaks about rejection. That difference matters. You see it most clearly in the small moments. Group dinners, family gatherings, holidays. Meri shows up and tries to re-enter the circle without demanding space. She laughs at the wrong moments. She sits quietly when conversations drift past her. She offers small comments that never quite land. Her presence feels cautious, like someone asking permission without using words. Again and again, Meri attempts to rebuild emotional proximity through participation. She attends events even when the tension is visible. She volunteers to help. She stays longer than is comfortable. She tries to belong through availability. But what follows is rarely open conflict. It is distance, side conversations, gentle deflections, emotional redirection. Meri absorbs disappointment without pushing back. When something hurts her, she often takes responsibility for the discomfort in the room. She explains herself. She clarifies her intentions. She adjusts her tone. The burden of repair almost always lands on her. And over time, that pattern isolates her more effectively than any argument could. This isolation does not begin after the scandal. It begins when Meri becomes emotionally inconvenient. She names feelings that challenge the family's emotional narrative, a narrative built on sacrifice, on plural marriage as growth, on pain as something to manage quietly. Meri does not manage it quietly. She speaks it. And that honesty creates tension that no one knows how to hold. So the group slowly stops engaging with it. They acknowledge her feelings without responding to them. They validate her words without changing behavior. They listen without adjusting structure. That is how emotional distance becomes permanent without ever being declared. By the time later accusations and conflicts surface, Meri is already standing outside the emotional center of the family. Not because she is aggressive, not because she is unkind, but because she refuses to translate loneliness into something more acceptable. The ending truth of Meri's story is not that she is difficult to love. It is that she is difficult to emotionally manage. In a family that survives by smoothing pain into usable information, Meri's honesty does not fit the system. She is not disruptive. She is inconvenient. Stories inside this family do not stay small. They get told again, then told softer, then told safer, until they stop sounding like one moment and start sounding like a personality. You see this pattern every time the family revisits old conflict on the couch. The same words come back: trust issues, walls, guarded, hard to work with, difficult. Those labels travel farther than the original behavior ever did. And over time, they become shorthand, not for what happened, for who someone is. This is how reputation forms when a family stays closed. Not through facts, through repetition. Meri feels this more than anyone. When group conversations turn toward old pain, she rarely has emotional backup in the room. You can watch her body change when the tone shifts. Her shoulders drop. Her voice gets smaller. She starts explaining instead of responding. She does not challenge the framing. She tries to survive it. When someone else describes her actions, Meri listens quietly and then corrects small details. But the larger story stays untouched. The emotional conclusion has already been agreed on before she speaks. And that is what makes those scenes heavy. Not confrontation. Consensus. Now watch the contrast. When conversations involve Robyn, Cody's tone changes. He slows down. He steps in. He reframes. He explains what she meant. He softens how her behavior is received. If Robyn cries, the room pauses. If Meri struggles, the room moves on. That difference is not subtle. It is structural. Robyn is emotionally protected. Meri is emotionally corrected. You hear it in how Cody addresses conflict. With Robyn, he focuses on intention. With Meri, he focuses on impact. One gets emotional context. The other gets emotional accountability. And once the family adopts that pattern, the story does not need to be argued anymore. It simply runs. This is where the real damage shows. Not in a single fight, but in how the group remembers the past together. Meri is rarely remembered for growth. She is remembered for disruption. And when someone has no emotional allies inside a group, their version of reality slowly disappears. They start adapting to the story written about them, not the one they lived. By the later seasons, you can feel the exhaustion across the family. The conversations feel heavier. The energy feels guarded. The joy feels forced. And outside that living room, something else is changing. The adult children begin stepping back from filming. Some distance themselves from the show. Some pull their private lives away from the cameras. The structure loses its center. Without the kids, without shared milestones, without the illusion of togetherness, what remains is the system itself. And systems built on emotional control do not age well. They collapse quietly. from fatigue, from disengagement, from too many people choosing silence instead of participation. And the most uncomfortable question now hangs in the room. If no one wants to perform this story anymore, what happens to the story itself? At the start of this story, the question sounds small. Was the catfishing scandal about betrayal? Or was it about control? After watching how this family functions across years, the answer stops feeling simple. Information is not casual inside this marriage. It moves carefully. It moves upward. It moves with consequences. When one person controls access to emotional safety, housing, money, and attention, stories stop being neutral. They become tools. And without anyone ever saying it out loud, the wives learn the same survival rule. If you want stability, you stay useful. If you want protection, you stay aligned. If you want peace, you manage what reaches Cody. That is not friendship. That is positioning. Christine breaks from this first. You see it clearly in her voice during the seasons leading to her exit. She stops translating her pain into something softer. She stops waiting for emotional permission. She names what she is not getting and what she will no longer accept. When she leaves, she does more than exit a marriage. She exits the reporting structure. She removes herself from the competition, and the system loses a stabilizing piece. Janelle stands in a different place. She understands the financial mess better than anyone. She talks openly about the lack of clarity, the lack of ownership, the fear of being left without security. She wants independence. But she also knows how fragile independence feels when assets remain shared and decisions remain centralized. So she hesitates, not because she lacks courage, because survival is not only emotional, it is practical. Meri never escapes the middle. She remains emotionally stranded, still hoping for connection long after the structure stops offering it, still measuring herself against a place she no longer fits. Her isolation is not dramatic. It is slow. It is quiet. It is persistent. And while the story often frames Robyn as the winner, the ending does not support that. Robyn and Cody end up increasingly closed off, more defensive, more separate from the rest of the family. The same emotional alignment that once created safety now creates distance. Protection becomes isolation. The structure protects itself, not the people inside it. This is not a story about villains. It is about what happens when love is filtered through hierarchy, when communication becomes leverage, when honesty becomes risky. Families built around power and secrecy do not collapse from one scandal. They erode from repetition, from fear, from constant emotional calculation. So here's the real question I want you to sit with. When a family rewards silence, loyalty, and usefulness more than honesty, who actually pays the price in the end?